There's a certain dissonance you feel when you're connected to a dismissive avoidant. You can sense they want you, not in fleeting, shallow ways, but in a way that tethers them to you quietly. You catch glimpses, the lingering glance, the subtle check-ins, the way they soften in rare moments when they think you're not paying attention. But alongside those glimpses comes the pullback, the cold front, the evasive answers, the conversations that stop just short of real vulnerability. For a dismissive avoidant, wanting you and admitting they want you are two entirely different. One lives in the realm of feeling. The other lives in the realm of exposure. And for someone who has built their identity around self-protection, exposure feels like danger. So they do something else instead, something subtle. They don't confess, they don't declare, and they rarely pursue in a straightforward way. They play mind games, not necessarily to be cruel or manipulative, but because these games allow them to keep you close without having to step into the vulnerable territory of openly wanting you. They'll create just enough tension to hold your attention. They'll offer just enough warmth to keep you wondering. They'll pull you into a rhythm where you're never fully secure, but never fully let go. And if you don't see these games for what they are, you'll start bending yourself to accommodate them. You'll confuse the challenge for chemistry, the push-pull for passion, the uncertainty for depth. But here's the truth. These games are not random. They're calculated, consciously or not, to maintain control while avoiding exposure. They're designed to keep the emotional scales tipped in their favor, where they can feel the comfort of your presence without the discomfort of having to truly show up. And the moment you start recognizing them, the spell begins to break. Because once you see a mind game clearly, you can't unsee it. And when you stop reacting the way they expect, the power dynamic shifts up. So let's talk about these games. The quiet, calculated moves dismissive avoidants make when they want you in their life, but can't or won't admit it. The first is the hot and cold hook. At first, it feels magnetic. They'll draw you in with surprising intensity, a deep conversation, a rare vulnerability, a night where their guard comes down and you catch a glimpse of their real self. It feels rare, precious, almost like they've let you into a sacred space no one else gets to see. But just as you start to feel the connections solidify, they cool off. Messages slow down. Plans are vague. The same person who looked at you like you were the only one in the room now seems distracted, distant. And you wonder what happened. Here's what's happening beneath the surface. The heat wasn't fake. They weren't lying about the connection. But when a dismissive avoidant feels too close, their nervous system flips the breaker. That burst of intimacy triggers a flood of old fears. If I rely on you, will you control me? If I open up, will I lose myself? If I let you in, will you leave? So they retreat. Not necessarily to punish you, but to reestablish their equilibrium. And that retreat sends you spiraling, because your nervous system reads it as rejection. So you try to reignite the warmth. You initiate more. You try harder. You make the plans. You keep the thread alive. And in doing so, you've stepped right into the hook. The avoidant doesn't have to pursue you because now you're the one trying to close the gap. They can enjoy your presence on their terms, without risking the vulnerability of consistent closeness. This is why the hot and cold pattern is so potent. The warmth keeps you hopeful. The cold keeps you chasing. And together they keep you invested without them ever having to fully commit. Once you see it though, you start to realize the heat is not a promise, and the cold is not a punishment. They're simply the push and pull of someone trying to balance desire with fear. The real shift happens when you stop reacting to the cold as if it's your job to fix it. When you stop rushing in to bridge the gap, the hook loses its grip. And that steps when the second game tends to surface. They're not always gone. They're not always present. They're available just enough to keep you believing that progress is happening. Maybe they disappear for a few days, And just when you've decided to emotionally step back, a text pops up thinking about you. Or you get a late night call where they sound softer, warmer, more engaged than ever. And in that moment, the distance dissolves. You exhale. You think, there they are. This is the real them. But it's not the full truth. It's a fragment, a controlled dose of connection designed to keep you tethered. See, a dismissive avoidant knows, consciously or not, that if they disappear completely, you'll move on. But if they show up in measured doses, they can keep you in orbit without the risk of sustained vulnerability. It's not that they don't feel something, it's that they want to manage how much of themselves you can actually access. And because these moments of availability feel so good, because they contrast so sharply with the silence, your brain starts to cling to them. You begin measuring the relationship by its best moments instead of its consistent reality. The danger here is subtle but powerful. You start lowering your expectations. You stop asking for more because you don't want to disrupt the little you're getting. You convince yourself that these crumbs are a sign of a deeper loaf you'll eventually be allowed to have. But here's the thing. Someone who truly wants you in their life doesn't ration themselves out like a scarce resource. They don't give you just enough to keep you hopeful while keeping their own walls intact. The selective availability trap works because it blends just enough intimacy with just enough absence to keep you hooked on the highs. But once you stop treating their availability as proof of progress, once you start looking at the overall pattern instead of the isolated moments, the illusion starts to crumble. And when you stop chasing their availability, they feel the shift, which often triggers the next move in their playbook. If this is landing for you, subscribe. We suck just getting started. The third is the jealousy probe. It's subtle, almost imperceptible at first. They'll make an offhand comment about someone else finding them attractive. They'll casually mention that an ex reached out. They might post something on social media that hints at other people being in their orbit. It's not an outright declaration, it's a breadcrumb, carefully placed to see how you'll react. Why? Because for a dismissive avoidant, direct reassurance is terrifying. Admitting they want you to stay, admitting they care, feels like handing over too much power. So instead, they stir the waters. They want to see, will you lean in? Will you try harder? Will you signal that you're invested by showing discomfort or fear of losing them? And here's the twist. Sometimes they don't even realize they're doing it. For them, it's a way of avoiding direct vulnerability while still getting proof of your attachment. If you react, they feel secure in your interest. If you don't, they might increase the intensity of these probes. The danger here is how easily it can pull you off center. Suddenly, you're analyzing every interaction for signs of competition. You're feeling a low-grade anxiety in the connection, trying to prove your place without even realizing you've stepped into a game. And it works because it triggers your attachment system. It shifts you from a position of self-trust into a position of proving. And the more you prove, the less they have to. The jealousy probe keeps the emotional scales tilted toward them. It sets a way of getting the security of your pursuit without ever having to directly say, I want you here. The way you break this one is by refusing to bite the hook. You acknowledge the bait, but you don't scramble for reassurance. You stay grounded in the knowledge that your value isn't dependent on competing for space in someone's life. And when that doesn't work on you, they often pivot to a different kind of test. One that's less about provoking fear and more about controlling the pace. The fourth is the slow drip of progress. This one is especially insidious because it feels like movement, but it's actually control. Instead of outright avoidance, they'll give you incremental steps forward. Maybe they agree to spend more time together. Maybe they share a personal story they've never told you before. Maybe they let you meet a friend or invite you into a slightly more private part of their world. Each step feels like a breakthrough. You think we're getting there, they're opening up. And because each moment feels earned, you hold on to it tightly. But here's the truth. The pace isn't accidental. They're giving you just enough to keep you believing there's momentum, while ensuring it never moves fast enough to overwhelm them. This tactic works so well because it taps into your hope. You start believing that patience will be rewarded. You tell yourself they're just different, they need more time, they're worth the wait. And slowly, you start adjusting your own needs and timelines to match theirs. But here's the hidden cost. You stop noticing that your emotional hunger is growing, that you're living on the edge of satisfaction, always reaching for a future moment that never fully arrives. The slow drip of progress isn't about no progress, it's about managing progress so they never have to feel too exposed, too accountable, too vulnerable all at once. And when you adapt to their pace, you're essentially agreeing to be fed in rations. Breaking this one isn't about demanding a sprint. It's about recognizing that healthy connection doesn't require you to starve between moments of closeness. It's about asking yourself, if the pace never changes, would I still want this? And if the answer is no, then the drip isn't progress, it's a leash. And when you start tugging against that leash, or worse, letting it go, that's when they pull out one of the most confusing moves of all. The fifth is the emotional mirage. This is when they give you a deep, intimate moment that feels like the relationship you've been hoping for, and then vanish back into distance as if it never happened. It might be a night where they open up about their childhood, a conversation where they admit a fear they've never shared, or a moment where you feel their walls completely drop. But then, nothing. No follow-up conversation, no sustained openness. Sometimes they even act the next day like it never happened, and you're left clutching the memory, trying to figure out what went wrong. Here's what's happening. For a dismissive avoidant, that vulnerability is like holding their breath underwater. They can do it briefly, but eventually they have to come up for air, and for them, air means distance. The more intimate the moment, the stronger the need to retreat. The emotional mirage works because it feels like proof of potential. It convinces you to stay invested because you've seen what it could be. It's not hope built on fantasy. It's hope built on real experiences, and that makes it even harder to walk away. But here's the hard truth. Potential without consistency is just a mirage. You can't build a future on moments that evaporate as soon as they arrive. When you stop romanticizing the peaks and start evaluating the whole landscape, you realize the mirage is designed, consciously or not, to keep you thirsting in an emotional desert. And when that mirage starts to fade in its power over you, a dismissive avoidant will often switch tactics. If the warm moments aren't enough to keep you hooked, they may resort to something that plays with your sense of stability in a different way altogether. The sixth is the future tease. They don't decommit to you fully in the present, but they drop just enough hints about the future to keep you emotionally anchored. It might be a casual "when we go there someday" while scrolling through travel photos, or a vague "yeah, I could see us living together one day." They're not making a plan. They're planting an image. And for someone who's invested in them, that image is powerful. It keeps you engaged, patient, and willing to tolerate a lack of present commitment because you believe you're both headed somewhere. But here's the thing. For a dismissive avoidant, talking about the future in vague, dreamy terms costs nothing. It doesn't require real change, real steps, or real vulnerability. It gives them the benefit of your hope without the risk of immediate closeness. If you've ever been in this dynamic, you know the pattern. Months pass, maybe years, and the future they dangled never materializes. Not because they never felt anything, but because the idea of that future was safer for them than the reality of building it. Breaking this one means shifting your attention out of the imagined future and into the present evidence. Asking yourself, if nothing changed from today, would this relationship meet my needs? And if the answer is no, then the future they're painting is just a delay tactic in prettier wrapping. And when you stop buying into the tease, when you bring the focus back to the here and now, you remove one of their most comfortable shields. And that's when they might try their final, most personal move, one that's less about control and more about emotional survival. This one is especially disorienting because it feels like you've crossed some invisible finish line. They finally let their guard down. They tell you something they've never told anyone. They let you see the cracks in the armor. And for a moment, you feel like you've been granted the rare privilege of knowing the real them. You meet that vulnerability with care, warmth, and safety. You think, this is it. This is the turning point. But almost immediately afterward, something changes. They grow distant. Their tone shifts. Plans get canceled. Messages take longer to answer. And you're left wondering if you did something wrong, if maybe you pushed too far or reacted the wrong way. Here's the truth. Their withdrawal isn't about you mishandling their vulnerability. It's about their own reflex to protect themselves after exposing too much. For a dismissive avoidant, being seen deeply can feel as threatening as being rejected. The intimacy is real, but so is the instinct to slam the door afterward. The vulnerability withdrawal keeps you in a constant state of self-questioning. It makes you walk on eggshells after moments of closeness, worried you might scare them away again. And in that anxiety, you become even more careful, even more accommodating, which means they never have to confront the cost of their own retreat. Breaking this pattern starts with understanding that their pullback isn't proof you crossed a line. It's proof you touched one of theirs. You didn't break them. You didn't fail. You simply came too close to the parts of themselves they still don't know how to keep open. And once you stop personalizing the withdrawal, you start reclaiming your balance. You realize their closeness and their distance are both about their comfort level, not your worth. So here's the truth. No one tells you when you're tangled up in the mind games of a dismissive avoidant. None of this means they don't care. None of this means you imagine the connection. In fact, in many cases, these games are the clearest sign that they do want you, but on terms that keep them safe from the vulnerability they fear most. The problem is, their safety comes at the expense of your peace. Their comfort often requires your confusion. And love, real love, cannot thrive in a space where one person's security depends on the other person's self-doubt. When you see the pattern, everything changes. You start realizing that the hot and cold isn't mystery, it's avoidance. That selective availability isn't patience, it's rationing. That jealousy probes aren't passion, they're tests. That slow progress isn't growth, it's control. That emotional mirages aren't breakthroughs, they're temporary retreats. That future teases aren't promises, they're distractions. That vulnerability withdrawals aren't punishments, they're self-protection. And once you name these games, you can step out of them. You stop taking the bait. You stop adjusting your boundaries to fit their comfort zone. You stop confusing temporary closeness for lasting commitment. And in that shift, something profound happens. You reclaim your position in your own life. Because here's the thing. You don't have to convince anyone to keep you. You don't have to play along just to keep the connection alive. You don't have to earn love by proving you can survive without it. The person who's meant for you won't require you to pass silent tests or decode mixed signals. They won't hide their care behind games. They'll meet you where you are, consistently, openly, without fear that your closeness will cost them their freedom. And maybe, just maybe, when you stop playing, the avoidant in your life will feel the shift. They'll see that your presence isn't a given and that your heart isn't something to ration. And if they're ready, they'll step forward without the games. If they don't, you'll still be whole, you'll still be clear, you'll still be walking toward the kind of love that doesn't make you guess. And if this spoke to something deep in you, if it felt like a mirror you've been avoiding, subscribe. Not because you need fixing, but because you're ready for every next step toward the love you've always deserved.